Have you ever wondered if forgiveness truly erases the consequences of adultery? You know, my friend, God is a merciful and He's a forgiving God. But the story of King David and his adulterous behavior, it shows that sin still has consequences. And in this video, I will share with you, the story of King David and how he committed adultery and was forgiven by God, but had to live with the painful consequences that followed. And I want you to stick around because the lesson of King David's life may help you if you find yourself in this situation and what you need to do, because we reap what we sow. We must be careful how we live. We must be careful what we do. And I want to help you in this video to understand that you also have the ability through God's grace and the Spirit of God in your life to overcome sin and temptation. So let's get right into it. In 2 Samuel chapter 11 and 12, we find one of the most well-known story in the Bible. King David, king of Israel, he committed adultery with Bathsheba, the wife of one of his most loyal soldiers, Uriah. When Bathsheba became pregnant, David tried to cover up his sin by arranging Uriah's death in battle. David seems to have gotten away with it, and he think that everything was cool. Like most of us sometimes when we do something that is wrong in the sight of God and with people, we think that it's just all good. Nobody see it, nobody hear, nobody know, so it's all cool, right? But God sent the prophet Nathan to confront him. David, heartbroken over his sin, he repented and God forgave him. But, and there is a big but, and here is something important. Though David was forgiven, the consequences of his actions causes ripple effect in his life in such a painful way. And I'm going to talk about what happened to David. He was considered a man after God's own heart, yet there are consequences for his actions. There are consequences for our actions. Let us look at consequence number 1. The death of David's child. The Bible tells us that God has forgiven David. God's forgiveness didn't stop the immediate consequences of the loss of David and Bathsheba's first child. Nathan told David that the child would die as a result of his sin. And after 7 days of illness, the baby passed away. I want you to imagine the heartache of losing a child, knowing it's tied to your choice, your choices, your consequences, your infraction. David's grief was profound, but the tragedy was just the beginning. Consequence number 2. There were issues in the house of David. After the death of the child, chaos erupted within David's household. God warned David that the sword would never depart from his house. In 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 10, it said, "Now therefore the sword shall never depart from thine house, because thou hast despised me, and hast taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be thy wife." You see, what followed was chain reaction of broken relationships and violence in his own family. Let us look at the key events that took place because of David's sin. Amnon sinned against Tamar. David had a son by the name of Amnon, and Amnon violated his half-sister Tamar. This was a terrible act of betrayal within the family. And that's in 2 Samuel chapter 13, verse 24. You see, Amnon raped Tamar, his half-sister. Absalom revenge against Amnon. That's another tragedy in the house of David. You see, Tamar's brother Absalom was outraged and angry about what he did because Amnon raped his sister. They were not the same mother, but they were the same father, right? That's his sister, and he raped her. And Absalom killed Amnon in revenge and causing further division and heartbreak in the house of David. You find it in 2 Samuel chapter 13 from verse 23 through 39. You can go read it in your own spare time. Here's another chaos in the house of David. Absalom rebellion. Absalom, now estranged from David, eventually rebelled against his father. He built up a following. He had his own men, had his own influence, and he declared himself king, and he forced David into exile. I want you to hear me and hear me well. This man, Absalom, the son of David, forced his father into exile. And Absalom's rebellion led to civil war, tearing the kingdom apart. 2 Samuel chapter 14 from verse 1 through verse 24. Think about that. David's own son leading an uprising against his own father. And even though David was a great king, his personal life, his personal sins brought strife into his family. What are you doing that might be impacting your house right now? What are some of the things that you might have done that you've seen the ripple effect and the domino effect and the impact that it has on your family long after you have committed that wrong? You see, the effect of his choices, it didn't just stop with him, but it deeply impacted those he loved. Let us look at consequence number 3, public humiliation. God has also told David that he would experience public humiliation as part of his consequences. And this happened during Absalom rebellion. In an ultimate act of disrespect to his father, Absalom slept with David's concubine in public view. Yes, read it in 2 Samuel chapter 16 and verse 22. What was once private shame became a public disgrace. David, great warrior. David, a worshiper. David, known as man after God's own heart, experienced deep humiliation because of his private sin. You might have done it in private, but sometimes the exposure is in the open. And even though he had repented, he had to live with those choices. He had to live through those moments of shame in front of his entire nation. Consequence number 4, ongoing conflicts in his reign. You know, my friend, David's sin didn't just bring family strife. It also impacted his reign as king. David faced ongoing conflicts, both internally and externally. There was civil war, rebellion, division. It all marked the later years of his reign. The peace and unity he once knew was constantly threatened by what he did. And the effect of his sin lingered long after the act itself. My friend, this is a lesson to learn. We got to be very careful and really understand who we really are as husbands, as men. If you're a wife, know your role, know your responsibility. So what can you learn from King David's story? First, God is a merciful and forgiving God. No sin is too great for God to forgive. But second, notice this, my friend. Sin has consequences, and those consequences can affect not just us, but the people we love and those around us. David's life reminds us that while forgiveness wipes away guilt, it doesn't always remove the impact of our choices. You know, maybe you are going through something similar in your life, in your marriage. You have made mistakes and you have asked God for forgiveness, but now you are living through the consequences. I want you to take heart in knowing that God's grace is still with you, just as it was with David. But also be mindful of the choices you make today. They have the power to shape your future and the lives of others around you, around me. But my friend, the best news of all is that by the grace of God, David faced every one of these consequences with the promises of God, with the love of God. His response, we see it recorded in the book of Psalms that gives hope, filled with peace and upliftment and encouragement to you and to me. Sometimes our deepest pain and anguish and brokenness becomes the catalyst, becomes the very thing that God used to shape us, to make us better. I've often maintained that the problem is not that you've made a mistake. The problem is when you make your mistakes become a habit. When you just keep doing what you wanted to do without considering the consequences for doing it. There are lessons to be learned from David that are very difficult, but also necessary. And I want to talk a little about the inescapable and painful consequences. You know, one thing is certain, sin always pays back, both believers and unbelievers. It pays back with boredom. It pays back with guilt. It pays back with shame, with loneliness, confusion, emptiness, loss of purpose, loss of hope, loss of rewards. You know, the negative consequences, you know, when situation goes wrong, we should never just often think that we are still under punishment and there is no hope, because Jesus already paid the price. Jesus finished work on the cross, free you from those sins. Now you need to walk in God's purpose. Now you walk in God's grace. Now you leave that side chicken, that side bae, and that crazy stuff that you're doing alone and yield your will to God. Some of y'all need to go home to your wife. Leave that Jezebel alone. You've been intoxicated by a witch. Please don't be confused about God's correction and discipline, because the Bible says, whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth. David was forgiven. The Lord has also put away your sins. 2 Samuel chapter 12 and verse 13. But forgiveness never seems to take away the consequences of that sin. David grieved over the awfulness of his sins. And in Psalms 51 and verse 4, he said, against thee only have I sinned and done this evil in thy sight. David also had to endure coming years of painful consequences, yet he did with peace. He did it with joy. He did it knowing that God is with him. With peace and settled faith, God's forgiveness and his wisdom will keep us. Don't allow your pain, don't allow what you did to keep you in that rut. Don't allow it to keep you in that scar mindset and, you know, that anguish mindset. Release yourself from it. Lay it at the feet of God. Ask God to forgive you. Get up and go. Get help. Get a mentor. Someone that can pour into you. And make a conscious decision never to return to the place that break you. Don't do it. Don't do it. And be reminded, God's forgiveness is always available. But wisdom calls us to live in a way that honors him from the start. That's it, my friend, for this video. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. May God bless you. I can't wait to see you in the next one. Check out this other video. It's definitely going to help you. Thank you so much. Be blessed.